call to love and really an introduction to her life. So I'm incredibly excited. Let's go ahead and start up with a prayer. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Blessed Mother, we entrust this entire semester, all that has been given to us, and all that weighs upon our shoulders unto thee. Through the intercession of Blessed Therese, we come to you, that you might bring us to Jesus, praying, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Let's go ahead and welcome up Jocelyn Perez.
Thank you guys for joining us here. I told Zach, who's doing the liturgy training upstairs, that I would try to speak softly so that we don't interrupt them. So, thank you for moving up. It's really helpful. Okay, cool. So, for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Jocelyn. I'm one of the campus ministers here at the UCC. And I'm really excited to kind of spend a month with you all studying and praying through the life of Saint Therese in this month of September. And tonight's really an introduction to Saint Therese and her vocation to love. I was honestly kind of reading through her autobiography, a couple other books accredited to her, and I was thinking to myself, I almost thought about reaching out to Gabe and Camilla and just be like, how does somebody do an intro to Saint Therese? There's like too much stuff here, and then you don't want to say what the next person is going to say, etc. So we'll just get started. But I wanted to start off by just giving you all a little bit of a background to her childhood, and you'll be learning a little bit about it throughout the night as well. But just to give you a sense, so she's the daughter of St. Louis and Zélie Martin. They're actually the first canonized, married couple that was canonized together. St. Louis, he actually desired to join a hermitage at the age of 20, but his entry was postponed. Her mother, St. Zélie, was a lace maker who joined the Sisters of Charity, but too was asked to return home. And her sister, Therese's aunt, entered the Visitation Convent. St. Therese was one of 9 children. 4 died at an early age. 1 entered the Visitation Convent, like her aunt, and the remaining 4 entered Carmel in Lisieux. Her mom actually had a great desire for her children to enter religious life. So Therese was the youngest of 9, and at the age of 15, she entered Carmel under the name Sister Therese of the Infant Jesus. And this year is actually the 150th anniversary of her birthday, which was January 2nd of 1873. Fun fact. Today is also the feast of Saint Mother Teresa, who had a beautiful devotion to Saint Therese, and she actually took her name, her religious name as well. So it's pretty providential and kind of cool today that it's Mother Teresa's feast day, and she was a great friend of Saint Therese as well. So a lot of what I'll share today is from the text from her autobiography. So Saint Therese, when she was in the convent, her sister, Mother Agnes of Jesus, asked her to write her autobiography. She was 21 years old, and she really only wrote it out of obedience. She did not have any desire to write about her life. And the year before that, her other biological sister, Maria of the Sacred Heart, also asked her to write about her spirituality. And so simply out of obedience, Therese did this. And it's really beautiful because you'll later learn about her, a little bit about her illness, but when Therese was writing her autobiography, she actually stopped using like an ink pen because her hands were in so much pain that she had to start writing with a pencil. So you can tell how much she just deeply did this out of obedience. Saint Therese, you'll also hear her being referred to as the Little Flower, just to give you a sense of who Therese was. A lot of times people, like Catholic circles, will talk about like, you're either Therese's best friend or you're like, I don't want to be your friend at all. And you'll kind of learn a little bit about why sometimes people can be a little bit resistant to friendship with St. Therese. So Therese often pondered, she writes in her autobiography about God having preferences. And so she would think about, she says things like, why did he pour out extraordinary graces on great sinners like St. Paul or St. Augustine? But then she would contemplate what she called privileged souls. And she would talk about privileged souls who experienced the greatest tenderness from the cradle to the grave, preserving the radiance of their baptismal robe from the stains of sin. So Therese would often, as a child, just like contemplate, like, why does God give people certain graces, etc., right? But it was actually through scripture where the Lord kind of illuminated some truth into this contemplation that she had through nature. So the little flower kind of comes in a lot when she started realizing just the different types of flowers in nature. And then this is where she realized that, she says, the splendor of the rose nor the lily's whiteness do not deprive the violet of its scent, nor make less ravishing the daisy's charm. So she goes on to say, he also created little ones who must be content to be daisies or violets. And I share this to kind of get us started tonight because I think a lot of times when we're hearing about the lives of the saints, and Father Gonzalo kind of prefaced this as well, we can tend to fall into comparison of this kind of idealistic like perfection that's super unattainable and that's great for you, but how does that fit into my life? But I think I share this comparison that she has with people and the different types of flowers because ultimately Therese, as the little flower, desired for all to be content with God simply looking at them. And I think this is really hard for most of us because we live in a world that oftentimes wants to just like remove suffering. And if we have any ounce of experience of suffering in our own lives, we're quick to turn to God in disbelief that he actually loves us. But on the contrary, Therese tried to not live in such a way, and her desire was to resist the temptation that God does not love you, that God does not desire to look at you, and instead see God's mercy in suffering. So St. Therese, this is actually one of my favorite pictures of her because I think it just kind of, a lot of her pictures, she's not depicted as smiling, she's usually just kind of staring, or she's like bedridden because she's about to die, or different things like that. But this is actually, I think, one of the most joyful images of her. And you can see her youthfulness as well. But Therese ultimately desired to become a saint, to spend eternity in heaven with God. And she would say, I knew that to become a saint, one had to suffer much, always aim at perfection, Christ's example, right? And forget oneself. She said, I do not want to be a saint by halves. So she had this great conviction that she wanted everything God wanted to give her. One of my favorite quotes from St. Therese is, God gives me whatever I want because I want what he gives. So to have a heart that truly desires to want everything that God wants to give them, it has to include the trials, the crosses, the sufferings that he might ask of you. And this is not to say Therese had this like breeze of a childhood. If you don't know much about St. Therese's upbringing, it was not easy. She was definitely not immune to suffering herself and experienced a lot of it at a very early age. Her mom actually died when St. Therese was 4 years old, and this really shaped a lot of her upbringing. Like I said, she was the youngest of 9. When she was 9, her sister Pauline entered the cloister. She entered Carmel. And this really took Therese by surprise because in her own youthfulness, she thought that her sister would wait for her and then they could go together. She said, I wanted her to wait for me so that we could go into the desert together. And so because Therese just couldn't accept that her sister also left home to enter religious life, she actually became really sick for months. She was bedridden, she was immobile, she was really withdrawn from her friends and family. Then what they kind of call like a substitute, right, like to motherhood. She could barely allow for her third mother figure, Marie, to also leave for religious life. So it's like these mother figures were kind of leaving the home in a sense leaving Therese with a lot of pain. But she herself entered Carmel when she was only 15 years old. And soon after she entered the convent, her dad passed away. 2 years later, after the death of her father, she then became really sick. She suffered with tuberculosis, leading her to die at 24 years old. Yet even still, Therese knew as a little girl that she had just had such great experiences of love in her childhood. When you read her autobiography, she just raves about how much God loved her through these women in her life growing up, her sisters, her mother. And even when her mother passed away, the Lord still gifted me the love of my older sisters and the love of her father until his death. So accepting the great sufferings that she had in her short life, Therese discovered her vocation very early on. Her vocation to love, which is the introduction to tonight. And I think when we talk about friendship with the saints, to be accompanied by the saints, like Saint Therese, it means that we're allowing the example of their lives to teach us of God's love and infinite mercy. It's not meant to be like about the saint, it's meant to be about God who loved the saint. And so when we talk about holiness and sainthood, right, I think in general across religions, there's this goal, right, to be like God, to be set apart for God. And in Christianity, we know that God is love. So when we talk about holiness, holiness is the perfection of love. So if we're going to talk about Saint Therese and her call to love, we should first look at, well, what does this call to love look like? When we look at the great commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then we go on to read the second commandment, right, is you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And so we know this, like we learned about it growing up, right? But then Jesus, in John's Gospel, brings about a new commandment, right? He adds on to it. He says, I give you a new commandment, love one another as I have loved you. But we know that Jesus' love for us comes from the Father who loved him. And we see this through his life, his death, and his resurrection. I can't love one another unless I let him love me first. And I think we need to remember that as we're learning about St. Therese's teachings on love. I can't love another unless I let him love me first. And the reception of God's love for us, for you, is the first dimension in our call to holiness, to letting God love us. I think St. Therese really modeled that for us in her autobiography and her life. And I personally am really grateful that her sisters and the sisters in the convent kind of asked her out of obedience to share her autobiography. Otherwise, I don't think St. Therese would have wanted to write about herself. So St. Therese and her vocation to love, her vocation to love, I think, kind of has two components. It was a radical dependence on God. So this call to love is a radical dependence on God and a total abandonment to his mercy. And she honestly was the first, she'll be the first to tell you that she was not perfect by any means. She recognized virtue was not simply just doing the things like the patience, the humility, the gentleness, the kindness, because she knew that those were things that she could do naturally, so she recognized they weren't actually something that was hard for her, that was like a virtue she had to cultivate. And she speaks about her pride as well. She oftentimes didn't want to do things that she was asked to do. Like I mentioned, the autobiography, right? But then there's just like a number of things growing up that her mom would ask of her, that she recognized out of my own pride, like I don't want to do this, but I'm going to choose to do this with humility. And she described humility as a deep awareness of who we are in relation to the one who created us. A deep awareness of who we are in relation to the one who created us. She often had a fear of being praised. Just to give you an example of pride, she had a fear of being praised, so being affirmed by her works, right? For her works. Afraid that in hearing the good things that she did, she would then give credit to herself instead of God. But through cultivating this virtue of humility, she eventually realized that she didn't need to be afraid of praises, but instead, in all simplicity, praises to the goodness of God in her life. So continuing St. Therese and her vocation to love, there is a famous story about her time in Carmel in the cloister of a friendship that she had with one of the sisters. She was a little bit older than her. This is how Therese would describe this friendship. There's one sister in the community who has a knack of rubbing me the wrong way at every turn. This is translated, obviously. Her tricks of manner, her tricks of speech, her character just strike me as unlovable. But then she goes on, God must love her dearly. She was reminded that charity isn't a matter of fine sentiments, it means doing things. And she was determined to treat this sister as if she were the person she loved best in the world. So every time she would see her, she would pray for her, she would talk to her, and she would offer to God all of her virtues and her merits. And it was really beautiful because when she would spend time around this sister that she found hard to love, she said that she felt certain that Jesus would want her to do this, to love this sister. She said, because all artists like to hear their work praised. And Jesus, who fashions men's souls so skillfully, doesn't want us to stand about admiring a facade. He wants us to make our way in till we reach the inmost sanctuary, which is his chosen dwelling, and admire the beauty of that. So she recognized that Jesus was hidden in the depths of the soul of this sister. So much so that this sister once came to St. Therese, and she said, I wish you would tell me, Sister Therese of the child Jesus, what is it about me that gets the right side of you? You've always got a smile for me whenever I see you. So can you imagine, this person that St. Therese finds so hard to love feels so deeply loved by her that she wonders, what is it about me that you're so drawn to, right? And immediately she would attribute this to Jesus being hidden in the depths of her soul. So much so that St. Therese, her sister, Selina Marie, actually thought that this sister was Therese's best friend in the convent. That's how much she strived to love her. And she goes on to say, this story, it's not an example of this, sensible love, right? I just need to, love her and, be nice to her, right? See the good in her. This was a purification of love for St. Therese. That in moments of, painful periods of, darkness or dryness, love is not this, sensible, piety, right? But it's a call to virtue. And she defines this sanctity as a disposition of the heart which makes us humble and small in the arms of God, conscious of our weaknesses and confident to the point of audacity in the goodness of our Father. So she had this heroic desire to be virtuous and our call to love. So this is a little bit of just the life of St. Therese in Carmel. But another thing that I just wanted to share as well about St. Therese was she was also the patron saint of missions. But if you know much about Carmelites, they're cloistered, they don't really leave the convent. So Therese is known to be the patroness of missionaries, right? She actually really wanted to leave the convent in France to be sent on mission. She particularly desired to go on mission in Vietnam, but because she was getting sick and her poor health and everything, she was unable to make the journey. And she wasn't able to be this great missionary that she wanted to be. But determined not to only love God herself, but to also lead others to know and love him, she became this great intercessor where she would offer all of her prayers and sacrifices for missionaries around the world. I had this really beautiful experience with St. Therese this summer, because she tends to be the patron saint of missions. A lot of missionary groups kind of take her on as their patroness. But this summer I was visiting some missionary friends in Honduras, as some of you know, and I was on a mission. I was in the mountains of Comayagua, and we were doing home visits, and one of the last days on the trip, I got really sick, and I don't remember the last time I had felt the way that I was that day, and I just had a feeling this was not going to get any better anytime soon. So I had caught this disease like through the mosquitoes in the villages, and but it was 2 days before I was getting ready to give this talk. I was being asked to speak to over 100 youth in this village on God's love, and I was so excited. They were like, "We want you to speak on these 3 things, bring these scripture passages." I was like, these are like stories of like my own conversion. Like, I'm so excited to share this with the youth. And 2 nights before my talk, I quickly got sick. I was bedridden. I was sent in a car back 2.5 hours to our like main retreat house, and my mission was practically over in the sense that I wasn't going to be in the villages. I'm not giving that talk. It was quickly given to my friend, and I was devastated. And I remember a friend of mine texted me and said, "It's kind of like St. Therese. She wanted to go on a mission, and she couldn't because she was so sick." And I was like, "Yeah, it's so great. We're so similar. This is miserable." So the fever kept getting worse as the hours went on, and the next morning I woke up and I realized I'm going to be bedridden for who knows how long. My faith was honestly so tested that week in such a way that I really struggled to believe God would actually rescue me from this illness. I eventually was admitted to the hospital, and for what ended up being like 8 days of no food. So the last day that I was in Comayagua, I was getting ready for my flight the next morning to come back to Austin. I was kind of in my wheelchair, kind of making my way past the chapel in this big retreat center, getting ready to go to bed, feeling really hopeless and just like, I think I'm gonna come back to the States and just enter into their hospital, and the bills are gonna be so high, and like, what's gonna happen with my job? And I started thinking like, what is going to happen when I get back? And there was this seminarian that was also in town. He was from Dallas, and he comes to me and he asks if he can pray with me before I go to bed. I'm like, sure. So we kind of wheelchair over to the chapel, and he asks me, "Before we pray, I want to ask you a question. What do you want God to do for you?" I was like, oh, I could ask him for anything. So I just said, "I want to be healed." So we stayed in the chapel for a few minutes, and we prayed. And then a number of people started hearing that we were going to be praying for this desire of mine to be healed. And more missionaries, more seminarians started coming into the chapel praying with this guy. And we finished praying. Everyone starts leaving to go into the different men's and women's houses. But this missionary comes and stays back and asks if we can talk for a second. And he goes on to ask me, "Do you have a friendship with St. Therese?" And I'm like, "Actually, she's been just a saint that I've been asking for great intercession this week, asking her to help me with a desire for an increase in faith that God will take care of the details of what's going on." So he went on to share that as they were praying with me, he received this beautiful image of a bush that was falling apart. It was super dry. It needed plenty of water, but it just looked dead. And as he was praying and praying with me, this bush started coming to life again. It started growing its leaves back, and then it began to be covered in red roses, to the point where we actually smelled the roses in the chapel. So he looks at me very directly and says, "Jocelyn, St. Therese has been praying for you, and she sends you her shower of roses." And I was just in tears, because I'd been praying just for an increase in faith that God can take care of the details of my life that week. And to hear that I had actually had a book on the life of St. Therese on my bed when I was sick, and whenever I was able to actually open my eyes and feel like a human again, I would read a couple excerpts of her life. So it was just really consoling for me to experience her intercession this summer and the way that she prays for missionaries. And her life really gives us that example. She really believed that victory depends on our faith in him, on our hope, and on our charity. So like I said, I can't love one another unless I let him love me first. And I think each of us have like different desires. We can tell God like all the things that we want, right? What do you want of God? But I think one desire in particular that I think all of us have is our desire to believe that I am lovable, right? Our desire to believe that I can be lovable. I think this is such a beautiful example of how that is actually attainable for us, is through Saint Therese. Her life and the way that she lived in the cloister and her family life growing up was this constant effort, this constant cooperation with God's grace to truly believe and live in the reality and the truth that I am lovable in the eyes of God. And that my sole mission is to love God and love neighbor from that love that he gives me. So as we go on this month, you're probably thinking like, okay, well, like, how do you do it? How does this, like, how can I actually grow in holiness through love? Next Thursday, not Tuesday, next Thursday, Father Fernando will come and he'll share more on Therese's teaching on what she called the little way, how she teaches us to place our total confidence in God's providence, and how to make this total offering to God's merciful love. So I really encourage you to come back next Thursday to get this deeper understanding of her doctrine. I think she's a doctor of the church. I think she's one of 3 women that are doctors of the church. 4. Thank you. This is another St. Therese fan here. So yes, she, we'll learn a little bit more about her doctrine, what she calls the little way, next week, and then the week after we'll hear on how to apply it to our lives.
Thanks, Jocelyn. That was a really lovely talk. One of the things that stuck out to me was one of the quotes you brought up from Therese. God gives me whatever I want because I want everything that he gives, right? Yeah. Which reminded me of Father Jonathan in one of his homilies. He was talking about Abraham interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah and how he kept going lower, like, okay, if there's 100 people, will you save the city? If there's 50, if there's 5. And Father Jonathan gave the image of, as Abraham's going lower and lower and lower, God is like delighting at him going lower. He's like, come on, like, cut me lower. I want you to. So like the more we intercede, the more we enter into the heart of God. We're going to enter into a quick Q&A session, so if you all have any questions, you're welcome to ask Jocelyn herself. And then after that, we'll go into small groups like we did last time. So I'm going to hand the mic back over to her.
What was it that initially drew you to Perez? How old were you, and can you recall any specific circumstances that made you so strongly drawn to her?
Good question. It was actually here when I was a student at UT. My sophomore year, I had a group of friends here at the UCC, and I had this like deep love for desiring to just grow in better understanding of what it looks like for God to love you, and the simplicity in that. And I actually wasn't confirmed until my senior year of high school, which is a part of my story. And all of my friends at the UCC thought that Saint Therese was my confirmation saint. I didn't know what they were talking about. I honestly couldn't even tell you who my confirmation saint was, even though it had been 2 years ago. And just students at the UCCs just started asking, like, have you ever heard of this Saint Perez of Lisieux? And it really wasn't until one of my good friends here had actually grabbed a group of us and started a group chat and said, her feast day is October 1st. And so he basically asked his friends, do you all want to pray the 9-day novena to Saint Therese and then take a road trip to the Basilica in San Antonio? And that was really just like the first invitation to getting to know Saint Therese. I was really excited. I was like, a road trip, we're all Catholic, we're going to go to this Basilica of this like saint everyone keeps talking about. And just reading the novena, understanding the life of Saint Therese through that novena, and especially her friendship with her mom. My first 4 years of my life, like, I can tell you, I spent every day with my mom. She was my best friend. And my mom was diagnosed with cancer my senior year at UT. And then just like the way that our friendship grew even stronger while I was in college through her treatments, just brought me back to friendship with Saint Therese, and reflecting on just like her sufferings while her mom was really sick. And just through my friends talking about her and sharing. But I think the trip to the Basilica, that was a huge pivotal moment for me in college. highly recommend you take a road trip and finish a novena with your friends in San Antonio.
Just as a follow-up, just to ask you this, I was struck when you said that it can be all or nothing, and some people really don't embrace Therese. And that surprised me because just, she seems so utterly lovable. What do you think it is that makes people hesitate?
I think something that I've been praying about as I was preparing for this talk was the way that we can kind of compartmentalize God's love for us. Like, could God actually care about that part of the day when I'm folding my laundry, or I'm doing my dishes, or I'm walking to class? And I think Therese could recognize, like, God is in every part of my life and in every moment of my day. And so sometimes I feel like we can compartmentalize him in a sense and think, God cares about my grades, God cares about my friendships, God cares about my life of prayer, right? But could he actually care about, like, me making sure that I make my bed in the morning, or that I'm cleaning up after myself with roommates, right? And so I think in a sense, living in that truth that God actually cares about every part of my life, I think is something that St. Therese really models for us. And I think that that's something that he wants to continue to purify in our lives. Sometimes I feel like that's maybe where the hesitancy could be, but maybe somebody could speak into that.
So, like, in high school, like, read a little bit of the Story of the Soul, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, because it feels like when you're reading it, you're talking about, like, herself as a kid, and she's like, oh, I'm suffering from success, like, oh, I'm getting too many, like, compliments, man. And it just, I felt like she was very, like, scrupulous, and that kind of hurt me the wrong way sometimes.
And I think something to note too is reading or understanding, like, the times that the saints are living in too. And that was a big part of her experience in her childhood, was the culture around her at the time kind of almost kind of motivated that in her, like that sense of a little bit of, like, scrupulosity as well. But I think what's good to note, though, is in the examples that she shares of virtue is what's, like, actually going on in the interior, right? So the example of, I don't know how to receive these compliments, it's because in her like, interior, she knew, I'm kind of being a bit prideful right now, right? And so what does that, like, equate to, like, in my life when I'm receiving a gift and instead I'm wanting to grasp it instead of, like, offering it as in thanksgiving to God?
Jocelyn, what are some practical ways you think someone could, enter into a deeper intimacy and relationship with Perez if they wanted to but didn't know where to start?
I think when I shared earlier, just letting God love you, because I think Therese, and again, I didn't go too much into her teachings on the little way, right? But I think sometimes we can get caught up in, like, the kind of, like, small acts of service, like, I'm going to do this for you out of love for you, right? But it can then go inward to be about yourself. So I would just encourage you to, if you want to, one, read her autobiography of Story of the Soul. It's really, really beautiful. It's not that long. But I think, secondly, just growing in deeper awareness of God's love for you, so spending time in prayer, allowing God to actually see every part of your life and not just the ones that you think he wants to know about, and really imitating her in that way. I feel like St. Therese, like, had no limits with God. It was like, I want to talk to you about everything, right? And I think sometimes we can be hesitant because of our own personal history of what love looked like, or I've given love, or I've received love in a certain way. But I would say to just strive for that sense of no limits, like she did with God.
Thanks, Jocelyn.